There's so much that has been said and written about the Abrams up to now. Views on this main American tank varied greatly, from high praise to extremely critical remarks. Of course, any opinion will naturally have a bit of subjectivity. However, facts are indeed indisputable. Yes, they can be presented in different ways. One can keep silent about something or present it from another angle, but in this video, we will try to dig deeper into the details and find out everything. Weak areas and vulnerabilities of this American colossus. The first mass-produced Abrams came off the assembly line at the tank plant in Lima, Ohio in February 1980. M1 was the first American tank developed after the end of World War II, consistent with new combat doctrines. According to American experts, Abrams outperformed the then-serving M60 nearly twice over. The tank's creation was closely coordinated with German tank builders, but with distinct American features. Even though the American model emerged as one of the best representatives of the Western approach, it still suffers from typical shortcomings of this concept. The Abrams is a weighty, large-scale machine. This is partially because of the addition of a fourth crew member, the loader. After all, an autoloader takes up less space, indicating that a larger volume needs to be armored. By the way, here are some figures comparing the armored volume of the Abrams with other well-known tanks. As a result, the first modification of the M1 weighed a total of 54.5 tons, compared to 44.5 for the earlier T-72B, and 41 tons for the first T-72 Ural from 1974. Later, in the race for heavier armor, the M1A1 weighed more than 57 tons. The successor to the M1A2 weighed 63 tons, and the current M1A2 CE3 has increased to nearly 70 tons. But the increased weight is always a minus of cross-country ability, dynamics and transportability. Yes, armored, honestly, Abram. Extremely uneven. Only the front has good protection, while the sides, for example, help the crew to take shelter from rain or hail. Such a layout is due to some misconceptions of the NATO military doctrine, which implies the supremacy of the air fleet, and the ground forces are more on the ground, and the tank is seen in it exclusively as a means of fighting other tanks. However, life as usual slowly puts everything in its place. In the United States, they don't like to admit the shortcomings of their weapons, but you can't get away from the truth. Suffice it to look at what has happened to the Abrams in numerous wars in recent years, and not only in those in which the American military participated, but also its allies. Propagandists on the other side of the ocean like to talk about the Gulf War 30 years ago, when the M1A2 Abrams proved itself in battles against the Iraqi army, but Saddam Hussein's troops mostly, Soviet T-55S and the first T-72S. The former had a cannon from around the end of World War II. The latter did not have up-to-date shells, and those they had simply could not penetrate the armor of the Americans. Add to this the low level of training of Iraqi crews, and it becomes more understandable why Soviet tanks suffered one defeat after another. If the Iraqis were smarter, they simply wouldn't be engaged in a direct battle with the more technological, advanced, and at least 20 years younger than the Abrams. Experience is a lucrative business. The Second Iraq War dispelled myths about American invincibility. It turns out the Abrams tanks weren't immortal. They were destroyed not by tanks, but by rebels using old Soviet-made grenade launchers. A similar unfortunate situation repeated itself during the Saudi Arabian war with the Yemeni Houthi rebels. A massive amount of money, American support, and even the Abrams tanks didn't help the Saudis very much. These were actively destroyed the same Soviet faggots Conquerors, Malyutka, and Iranian Towson 1 complexes. Yemen revealed a simple truth. Abrams tanks were primarily created to fight Soviet tanks, ignoring potential different scenarios in local conflicts. Primarily, the Houthis set up ambushes during tank movements. The element of surprise combined with high accuracy led to fatal consequences. One shot even from 3.5 kilometers was enough to set the Abrams tanks on fire, sometimes even tearing off the turret. But why it happened, let's find out now. Credit is due to American designers. Among all known Western tanks, the Abrams is the most compact. For comparison, its height is 2 meters 38 centimeters. Compare that with other Western and non-Western tanks and you'll grasp what I mean. Essentially, the engineers went out of their way to make their tank as small and light as they could. They were successful to the extent that the Western concept allowed, because ultimately, the American tank was still almost 1.5 meters taller than the OT-72B. The area of its main visual mass in side view also exceeded its Soviet counterpart. We're talking the size of a bus, but still, they managed to keep it within a reasonable weight limit. American engineers found a workaround, but to tell you the truth, it does not make much sense. Let me clarify. In the early post-war years, the armor of heavy tanks of comparable weight was more or less the same. In the era of super-powerful projectiles, the method that the Western school thought would no longer work. We had to search for a compromise once more, so the engineers pulled all the main armor towards 3 elements: the lower front plate and the 2 turret cheeks. That's essentially their full authority. Well, in this situation, we just do what we can. We're here with our capabilities, that's it. Because the rest either has a relatively low level of protection or was practically left without it. This principle, which originated from the Navy in the late 19th century, is called all or nothing. Under this principle, the vitally important parts of the ship were covered with the thickest possible armor, while the remaining zones were practically left without protection. That would be fine, but the ship's armoring principle is completely unacceptable for a tank due to its relatively smaller size and tight layout. The vitally important parts of a land vehicle can be said. Everywhere, armor penetration practically always leads to the destruction, or at least the disabling, of the vehicle. This is the fundamental contradiction at the core of what many worldwide publications, including Discovery, dub the world's best tank. Now, let's take a complete tour of the Obraks. Let's begin with the frontal area of the hull and the welded turret. They utilize multi-layered armor, identical to the British combined armor Chobham. The formula is a closely guarded secret, but as I've mentioned many times, it's a layered pie made of steel, ceramics, rubber, Kevlar, air pockets, and several other things. All these ingredients are sandwiched between the outer and inner armor plates, which are connected to each other by transversal plates. Concerning the turret, it's 2 plates of 125 mm each, but assessing the real protection of the Abrams is a difficult task because the Americans took it a step further than the British and stacked numerous variations of internal armor packages. This means that tanks that look identical on the outside can have stark differences in their protection indicators. Nevertheless, I suggest we base our discussion on the widely known report of Comrade Lindstrom from 1993. This report, which was leaked to the public, was written for a tender in Sweden for a new main battle tank. Jumping ahead a little, there were many interesting points mentioned in the report that caught my attention. Maybe I will even dedicate an issue to this topic sometime. But what's relevant to us now is the fact that the M1A2 Abrams also participated in this tender. The Swedes estimated the turret's protection at 600mm for kinetic weaponry and 900mm against shaped charge weapons, which is quite notable. For the hull, the figures were significantly lesser, standing at 350 and 750mm, respectively. All of these measurements are only applicable within the maneuvering angles of 25 to 30 degrees. When attacked from the side, even at an angle of 45 degrees, the protection against the same heat weapons falls down to 380mm, and it's even lower for the hull. Interestingly, it's paradoxical, but the Abrams, unlike all other known tanks, has a lower frontal part that is better protected than the upper one. It's the one that provides the main protection to the hull, since the composite armor package is located right behind it, and Americans placed the upper frontal part almost horizontally to the ground, at a wild 83 degrees angle. The expectation is that rockets and shells will simply ricochet off it. The VLD itself is a 38mm steel plate, although there were rumors that it was 70 or 80mm. To use the angle of inclination to effectively increase the shear thickness and thus save on weight 1, but this VLD does effectively defend against cumulative charges, as the igniter of most such shells does not work beyond 75 degrees. But if a powerful armor-piercing high-explosive shell or an anti-tank grenade arrives here, these 38mm will simply get blown to pieces, and following them, the driver, fuel tanks, and other goodies. It is not surprising that the Swedes experience a significant lag in the M1/2 in terms of hull protection, which according to their calculations was at the level of some 60s tank. The turret protection also fell short of the Leopard 2. It was roughly at the level of the T-80U, which also took part in the competition, by the way, also not the best of Soviet technology. And note, this is not propaganda, but a quite serious and real report from neutral Sweden at the time. Today it's 2023, and the current generation of Abrams, the M1A2 SCP-3, is causing quite a stir due to the uranium content in its armor. Let's understand what it is all about. When we talk about uranium armor, we're referring to layers of this heavy metal inside armor packages. In Abrams, it is not found everywhere, only in the turret cheeks and sides and also in the front of the hull. Americans have already created 3 types of armor packages with depleted uranium. The 4th is said to be ready, but has not been deployed yet. If we boil it down, Abrams' uranium armor is an American evolution of Chobham composite armor, which now includes layers of this extraordinary substance. As the only American tank that uses uranium for protection, this approach has its own set of advantages and disadvantages. First of all, uranium is an extremely dense and heavy material. Its density, and therefore its weight, is about 1.7 times that of lead by an average of 2.5 times. In addition, the sheets with uranium are very fragile, which excludes there even a slight bend, and this already causes the angularity of large dimensions. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that the plates in the armor package are not rigidly connected to each other by shock-absorbing binders. This is how it was done. Passing through an obstacle with different densities, the speed of the accumulative jet changes, which is why it fragments, dividing into less powerful, so to speak, droplets. At the same time, each new drop, as if it shifts the sheet to the side, which causes the next one to fall on an almost intact area of armor. Generally speaking, in October of 1988, a modification of the M1A1, her heavy armor with uranium armor of the first generation, the so-called uranium ceramics U-87, appeared, and 2 years later the armor of the second generation, the U-100 in aluminum packages, appeared. As of now, the third generation armor, which appeared on 101SA for Iraq, also inexplicably has the UR-100 index, but it is declared that the uranium in it is now graphite-coated and placed in titanium pouches. I think after Chernobyl, it's clear to everyone why they began using graphite. This package is actively used in the same M1A2, also known as M1A2C, the current flagship of the American Army, declares that the equivalent durability of the K-bobs in this modification is rated at 960 mm with a cumulative projectile and not improbable 1600, These are, of course, phenomenal numbers that a multitude of experts insist upon. We will not argue with this, but they still seem somewhat overestimated to me, and I will try to explain why later. Be that as it may, if the M1A1 weighed 57 tons, then the M101 heavy armor with uranium armor was already heavier. Let me remind you, it weighs 67 tons, but did we have to pay for it with mass alone? For protection, as you understand, any uranium, even depleted, is radioactive. Yes, its dangerous radiation is completely blocked by the lining, but this is until the tank is under fire during the test firings of Abrams tanks with uranium armor. It was, by the way, of the first generation. Scientists found out that the very first hit without penetration led to the dispersion of dangerous uranium at a distance of 5 to 7 m from the tank. Continuous shelling increased this zone to 8 to 10 m. And it also became clear that when hit by a large caliber shell, the uranium armor could even ignite, so that the tank, the environment, the crew in general, everyone is at risk. But the weight and radioactivity, that's fine. The main drawback of uranium is that it could have been replaced with tungsten. This metal has an even higher density. All other tank builders in the world use it. But why aren't the Americans not like everyone else, but because they've always known how to count money? The fact is that depleted uranium is a nuclear fuel production waste product that the US has a lot of, and they still need to find somewhere to dispose of it. What did they do with it? Thanks to characteristics similar to tungsten, they started to use it in tank construction. This helped to get rid of hundreds of thousands of tons of uranium. But what warms the capitalists' hearts even more is the value of 1 kilogram of very rare tungsten used in tank armor. It can cost up to $600. In general, somehow depleted uranium was registered in the ammunition rack of American tanks, and a little later in the armor. When independent American scientists decided to study the effect of depleted uranium on long-term operating armored vehicles and crews, these studies quickly stalled. They were simply not allowed to finish them. It's possible that the real situation with the health effects did not lead to abandoning this profitable technology. So, it is used and developed despite many critics, even in the US, regarding its durability of 960 to 1600 millimeters. Considering that Uranus is not some heavenly manna, but a very earthly metal, I have strong doubts about such drastically increased numbers given the stock 600 and 900 millimeters of standard M1A2 turrets. Also supporting this viewpoint is the fact that the armor was physically reinforced. To make the composite armor package inside more voluminous, looking at the photos, they added at most 150, 200 millimeters. So I guess the real durability of a Sepvatri turret will be around an 800 mark against kinetic rounds and 1,300 against heat rounds, although there is a probability that the increased size could provide numbers close to those they claim. But if you look at it that way, frontal armor does not solve the issue of low protection in all other crucial parts of the tank, which are covered by simple armor plates with a thickness ranging from 25 millimeters in the MTO area to 125 in the frontal part of the turret. And this only exacerbates Abrams' foundational problem of accumulating all the resilience in the forehead alone. This is particularly evident on the thin sides of the hull, like all Western tanks. Abrams is an exception, but only partially. The thing is, his cart has side steel that is only 30 millimeters thick. But after seeing how the Leopard is blown up by mines, the Americans decided they definitely didn't want the same, so in the area of the battle compartment, they additionally welded another 30 millimeter plate, making it 60 millimeters. Yes, it does not cover the entire side as a whole, but it already eliminates many dangerous situations. Abrams will travel further than the Leopard through a minefield. In addition, Americans hung 75 millimeter force screens on the front sides, adding an equivalent of about 20 millimeters of durability. All these measures partially equalize Abrams with Soviet tanks, which have 80 millimeter sides along the entire perimeter. But don't forget that Soviet-style tanks are all covered with reactive armor blocks, which can provide even better protection than the sides themselves. In the case of ERA, you can boldly add the equivalent of another 150 to 200 mm. So, although the protection of the side is not an obvious Achilles heel of Abrams, it is still a weak zone, which was literally pulled on crutches into the side like the German colleague The American will be dismantled by the same 30mm BMP-3 cannon and its analogues. But credit where credit is due, according to the report of the same Lindstrom, the protection of the sides of the turret of Abrams is phenomenal. Within the maneuvering range of 20 degrees, it amounts to not even 380, as required in the Pentagon, but all 480 mm from kinetic and 750 from shaped charge shells, that is, old. The turret can't be hit on the side, the same RPG-7 will be powerless. Such protection is due to the need to somehow cover the ammo, which is entirely located in the turret niche. But I suggest we start the next issue with the ammo rack. Please don't be too critical and treat this video more as entertaining content, which I collected for you based on information, I stress, only from open sources. After all, tanks are a secret topic and we discuss a lot of things. We might not know. On that note, I thank everyone for watching and see you very soon in my second video about Abrams. See you soon.